Κύριε Πρόεδρε του Ευρωπαϊκού.
Dear President of the European Parliament, dear members of the European Parliament, dear friends, thank you very much for the honor of having invited me to present to the European Parliament our ideas and our worries for the future of Europe and to discuss them with you. It's important and also symbolic that you give me this possibility just a few days after the end of a great adventure, the adjustment programs and the clean exit from the support programs of Greece after 8 years. The last time I had the honor to speak to you, Greece was in a very difficult situation. The policy of deficits and of wasting away the public money and the extended corruption of previous governments had led my country towards bankruptcy. And in parallel, the fact that the institutions didn't manage to advance and to foster the necessary structural reforms in the first years of the program, and their intention to press for austerity meant that we were on the verge of bankruptcy and also of an explosion, a social explosion. From 2010 to 2014, Greece lost 1/4 of its GDP. There's unemployment, there's poverty, and social exclusion. And they soared. And at the same time, the public debt soared. There were no investments, there was no public investments, and many thousands of young scientists left our country. The economic crisis in Greece and the fact they did not manage to deal with it turned it into a crisis for the whole of Europe. When I spoke here, you may remember that about half cheered me while the other half jeered me. But there were very few among you who believed that I would manage. We would cope. But Greece managed. Greece coped. 3 years down the line, it's a different country. We managed to become, from a part of the problem, a part of the solution for Europe. And the clean exit from the last 3-year program is, of course, a success, first of all, of the Greek people who sacrificed quite a lot to make sure that our country would stay in the heart of Europe. But it's also a success for the whole of Europe. We proved that if there's a spirit of solidarity and cooperation, we can solve crises. So we come out of this adventure in a stronger position. We are standing on our own 2 feet and are optimistic about the future. For the first time since the crisis began, the sacrifices of our people had an effect. We've managed to have a fiscal consolidation. We did deep reforms and breaks with the past, things that should have taken place decades ago. We managed to go from the spiraling of the crisis to growth. We have now new investments which make us a transport hub in our area. Furthermore, we have proven that there is a way out of crisis without destroying the social fabric. We supported the weakest, the most vulnerable. We managed to end the humanitarian crisis. We gave access to the health system to millions of people who were uninsured, and we did manage primary surpluses. 3 years earlier, nobody would believe they would have been possible, because we managed to combat tax evasion. There's no more wasting, there's no more corruption in public health and in public investments. We did important reforms like the unification of the social security funds, and through the sustainable adjustment of our public debt, we become again economically sovereign. We come back to the position that is due to us in the European developments. Last year, we came back to growth. We returned to growth. And for this year, the estimates are that we have 2.5% growth. The last 3 years, we were champions in absorbing European development funding. And in 2017, we were the second country in absorbing and using funds from the Juncker plan. We've had foreign investment of 3.6 billion, which is the best of the last decade. Within 3 years, unemployment fell by more than 7%. We've created more than 300,000 new jobs. We supported public hospitals. We have a unified first-level public health. We managed to face the weaknesses in schools, and we've increased our spending on scientific research to 1% of our GDP, and we're fighting to stop the brain drain, to turn it into a brain gain, helping the entrepreneurship of the young. And there is also a social income of solidarity. This is a Greek version of minimum guaranteed income, and more than 650,000 citizens receive this amount. So this means that poverty and social exclusion decrease. We create a network of social policies to help the most vulnerable. At the same time, and going against the current trends in opinion, we managed to increase individual rights and freedoms for our citizens. For the first time, we are granting citizenship to second-generation immigrants who were born and bred in Greece. And we have the recognition of gender identity, and we've agreed and adopted the possibility of marriage for same-sex couples, and we have abolished the Sharia for the Muslim community, and we are creating a mosque for the Muslims in Athens. In a Europe where there's more racism and xenophobia, Greece could what it could to manage the tremendous migrant and refugee flows within a climate of protection of international law, while other countries created barriers against refugees. We, despite our difficult economic position, we rejected hatred. Our local communities gave lessons of humanity, and we worked together with the European Union and international organizations to face up to this challenge. Today, the Asylum Authority, which did not exist 5 years ago, manages the greatest number in relation to our population of applications for asylum, and we contribute to peace and stability in an area which is destabilized, our broader area. Despite the instability and nationalist increase in Turkey, we managed to have channels of communication still open. And that means safeguarding peace in the Aegean Sea. And we're trying to find collaborative solutions for the refugee issue. And we've started talking for a just and sustainable solution for the Cyprus issue. In this destabilized area of the Eastern Mediterranean, together with Cyprus, we are a beacon of European stability. We've broadened our cooperation with Egypt, Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. And at the same time, we deepen European cooperation and co-development. This means that we open a European perspective for the Balkan countries. And the summit of our efforts is the historic agreement of Prespes, with our neighbor, and we continue our dialogue with Albania. After 26 years of destructive nationalism, we've managed, talking with the Prime Minister Zoran Zaev of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, to arrive at a mutually acceptable solution without the use or the threat of use of force, but through diplomacy and dialogue. This is an agreement which could be a model for solving other issues in our area. Members of the European Parliament, let me stress that our exit from the last program of fiscal adaptation does not mean that we will go back to the past in our country. Quite the contrary. We are determined to avoid the mistakes and the behaviors of the past which led to the crisis. The end of the adjustment programs does not mean a return to the past. It is a historic break with the past. It is a new beginning which will consolidate stability and security, heals wounds, and gradually opens new development perspectives for our country. In the years to come, let me assure you that we'll continue our reform efforts. We will manage to rationalize more and more our state, to modernize public administration, to fight red tape, to deepen the democratic radical changes which will take place with the upcoming constitutional reform. But we will continue our path of fiscal stability. And one of our priorities will be just development and the protection of the working people. Greece and the Greeks have proven these last years that they are really deeply dedicated to the idea of European integration. They had to suffer a lot, but they insisted on the European path of our country, despite the fact that some in Europe, in particular the most dominant ideas, hurt our people. Let us, after those 8 years of crisis, all come to some conclusions. And these conclusions should help us decide what kind of Europe we want and how we will protect it against new crises in the future. What is at stake today is something of an existential nature. Until now, the management of the financial crisis and the refugee crisis and the security crisis has shown up many deficits and contradictions. And this means that all these crises could become an existential, a structural crisis for the European project. Let me stress, the failure of the European Union to give democratic and functional solutions to the present challenges would unavoidably lead to the triumph of chauvinism and an increase in nationalist conflicts. This will mean that we will go back to fragmentation without unity, without cohesion, without an international role and perspective. During the financial crisis, the European Union, instead of becoming more democratic through the use of our institutional framework of the Treaty of Lisbon, during this period, we became more technocratic and centered on national states. Decisions were taken behind closed doors in informal meetings without a possibility of being responsible towards the citizens. And we had technocratic institutions like the Troika who had the keys of economic sovereignty and were not responsible to anybody. The role of the European institutions became a secondary role, and the Eurogroup, which does not have a recognized status, and the ECB became the main actors. The fiscal fetishism in facing up to the crisis meant that disparities became greater among member states and within them. This meant that many strata of our people had to face abject poverty and created a lot of fear and insecurity to our citizens. And this failure of the neoliberal management of the crisis feeds the monster of chauvinism and right-wing populism. The extreme right, instead of being the accused of history and instead of being isolated, came to the forefront. The refugee crisis that followed just confirmed the inability in Europe to go forward, since many of the member states do not believe in its founding values. If the logic of seclusion and not cooperation dominates, if the logic that each one can manage by themselves instead of sharing, the refusal of European solidarity, the poison of hatred and xenophobia become once more apparent in Europe 70 years after the tragedy of fascism. We just don't have to do with the electoral success of some parties of the far-right populists, but there is more xenophobia, more chauvinism within the democratic political parties. Racism and xenophobia are becoming the dominant political discourse in traditional conservative political forces, and not just in them. This means that in many crucial countries for the European project, the balance of forces becomes dangerous, and this could lead to European decomposition. You were afraid, some of you in here, in 2015, you were afraid of us, of Syriza, because we are fighting for a better Europe. We believed that whoever doubts the current policy of neoliberal policies and disparities is a danger for our common house. But 3 years down the line, those who believed in that should accept that they were wrong. The real threat for Europe is not those who fight to change it, but those who struggle to destroy it. Those who are at the other end of the spectrum vis-à-vis the all human values of solidarity. Those of us who believe, dear friends, dear members of the European Parliament, those of us who believe in the European vision, we believe to put aside our real and serious differences to face this great danger. The European idea should not be crushed between the destructive neoliberalism and the horrible far right. We have to give a decisive answer that the only way to safeguard the European unification is to upgrade democracy, justice and transparency through bold reforms. We should foster the perspective of a better Europe with European solutions for the challenges we face, for the refugee and migrant issue, for climate change, for security, for the democratic reform of the Eurozone, so that hope can defeat the far-right fear. We do not need more borders in Europe and less solidarity. We need a new social contract for social cohesion and the prosperity of our peoples. We need a deepening of the European unification. a stronger European Parliament, stronger European institutions through democratic and social control. We don't need a new priest caste of austerity. We need a new Eurozone with mechanisms for fighting disparities. We need a new social framework to help cohesion. We need an obligatory social pillar. We need a reform of the asylum system and a just sharing of the burden. We need a common European mechanism for fighting natural disasters. We need to strengthen the European perspective of Turkey and to make this great country become democratic again. And we need a European foreign policy which will contribute to the solution of the crises we're facing. Chairman, members of the European Parliament, to conclude, let me say that these last 3 years, Greece has managed to become a part of the solution instead of being a part of the problem for Europe. We've overcome the financial crisis. We managed to bear the burden with dignity of this great refugee crisis. We've opened new possibilities for the cooperation of our peoples with a peaceful policy, which makes us a player for peace and stability in this unstable area of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans. All these efforts of these 3 years is a good prospect, despite the fact that there are many clouds in our European sky. We showed that there is a way. If we really believe, and if you really put your back to it, you can manage. And we believe that is the way to the future of Europe. We have difficult fights instead of us. The European elections next May will be more than just one more election. It will be a combat on the basis of principles and values to defeat the extreme neoliberalism and far-right populism, to manage to transform the European idea, to increase unity and solidarity among the European peoples. In this fight, all progressive, democratic and pro-European forces have a duty to stand side by side, on the same side of history. We should not let Europe slide back to the past. Thank you very much.